Are we going to start the show with any sort of discussion about how you embezzled funds, used company money as your own personal slush fund to order Taco Bell?
No, I never regret getting Taco Bell. I'm Zach Snyder. He's Matt Snyder, and we're the D3 Datacast. Welcome to another week of Division Three basketball in the rearview mirror as we move along. We talk a lot about efficiency ratings in terms of teams, how strong each teams are, but just you can take all those teams that make up a conference and you can work up a conference rating. And so we're going to talk about that. We've learned a lot about who some of these teams are so far this season. We're going to kind of put them together in conference terms, talk about who has really emerged conference wide as the best conferences so far this season. There's a lot of things that go into, opinions about what makes up a great conference. You want to see strong teams, you want to see depth of really good competition. And that can be a matter of opinion, but with a computer rating we help have something to help sort that out. I'm looking forward to this one, Matt. A little bit of a different view, but using the same efficiency ratings that we always talk about. How are you feeling going into another week, looking back at the week that was?
I mean, a lot of good basketball. We're fully in mid-season now. I think I've mentioned that a couple last week or so. Not in the early season. We found out about these teams. Finals week is what a lot of schools are going through right now. So we're going to transition into kind of second semester up ahead, going through the new year. That's the stretch run of Division III basketball once we hit January. So only a couple weeks until we hit that point, Zach. I'm feeling really good about this.
All right, let's jump right into our 4-point play. Of course, this is our new segment debuted this year where we use the points of a compass to look around the Division Three landscape and talk about what's caught our eye, what's been on our minds as we've been, surveying the landscape over the past week. So let's start as we usually do, Matt, with you presenting what you're choosing here to talk about in the North.
Yeah, we start with me because people tune out for your opinions, Zach. So what I'm going to do for the North is the Mount Union Purple Raiders. They picked up a big win this past Saturday, defeating Muskingum on the road, 85-82 in a close game. The Purple Raiders are really highly rated in our D3 Datacast efficiency ratings. That's something that we're going to talk about from the conference side, as you mentioned. But Mount Union's number 3 in the country by our computer system. They've picked up 2 really big OAC wins already to start conference play. They had this win over Muskingum this past Saturday, and the previous week they beat Otterbein. These are the 2 highest rated teams in the OAC other than Mount Union, and now Mount Union has beaten both of them in the kind of their first round through the conference. Obviously, still a ton to play. OAC is strong and deep enough that there's more teams that could trip up Mount Union than just these 2. But that's clearing a big path for yourself when you have perhaps your 2 other biggest competitors and you've already beaten them this early in conference play. That's their only 2 conference games. They're 9-0 on the season. They look like a major player in the OAC. They look like a major player nationally. I think they're firmly on our radar as one of those like top 16 potential teams, if not higher than that, once we start talking about the NCAA tournament, which for D3 Datacast, we'll start talking about that in about October. So really big stuff for Mount Union. This is a program that's not a stranger to deep tournament runs. Remember, just like 3 seasons ago, they were in a Final Four. Really good program. I think they have not really lost a step since then. They've been in the national mix kind of most of those years in between. So, Christian Parker was a mainstay of the last several Mount Union teams that were really good. Without him, Mount Union's still great. So that's just a really good program, one of these programs that has churn and momentum with it in Division III basketball. So looking forward to what the Purple Raiders can do down the stretch with 2 OAC games now under their belt.
And this was always going to be a really interesting OAC race to watch because of the dynamic of John Carroll leaving the conference, going over to the NCAC. Just, on one hand, it would be easy to say that leaves Mount Union at the top there. But really just trying to see who might fill that void. Muskingum is off to a great start. Some of the best basketball that they've had in their program history. Mount Union getting that win at Muskingum is a big early OAC win. But as you said, a lot of runway left here in the OAC race, but Mount Union certainly looking good early on. Matt, I'm looking at Denison. They played at Oberlin in their NCAC opener on Wednesday, and while the 63-55 win was their second lowest point total of the season, that was entirely due to what happened in the first half. An interesting, first half, second half dynamic here. The Big Red shot just 6 of 28 overall and 1 of 12 from 3 in the first half and trailed 22-14 at the break. Yes, that was the halftime score, 22-14. Matt, Coach Chris Sullivan must have given his guys the kind of pep talk that you try to give me before one of these shows, except, his actually worked. Big turnaround for Denison as they shot 16 of 28 in the second half overall, 6 of 11 from 3 to put up 49 second half points, a 35-point difference from the first half to the second half. So on the surface, what looks just like ho-hum, a 63-55, not that interesting, score. You look at how that happened between first half and second half, and it was certainly, something that stood out to me earlier in the week.
Yeah, Denison looking really strong in the early going this season. Really strong out of the whole conference as well. Zach, that might come up later on in this episode when we talk about the NCAC, but things are looking really good from that whole conference right now.
Let's turn our compass to the East. What have you got here that's caught your eye or you've been thinking about in the East?
Yeah, let's talk about the Skyline Conference. Let's talk about Farmingdale State. They picked up another big win this weekend, convincing win over Swarthmore, 87-72. Farmingdale State are 8-2 on the season. Quality wins over Wesleyan and Swarthmore. That's a Centennial program. That's a NESCAC program. They've taken care of business against the rest of their schedule. Their 2 losses, 2 teams that are getting top 25 votes. They lost a close one to Cortland, and then they lost to NYU. But those are, reasonable teams that are quite good on the season. Farmingdale State, I think, is legit good this year. They're checking in our efficiency ratings at number 72. That's solidly in the top 100, which is kind of the upper quartile of Division III. So with them and now Yeshiva just outside the top 100 in our computer ratings, that gives 2 really good quality teams at the top of the Skyline. I think that's going to be a really excellent race there. Let's just say our computer is saying that Farmingdale is the favorite, a slim favorite in a close race there. Let's say that Farmingdale gets in, they get in the Pool A bid, they're in the national tournament. They're a team I could really envision being one of those sneaky teams that gets past the first round, past the first weekend. Maybe they're like the 8-9 game and they're playing against the host on the second night if they can win their opening round game. That's going to be a tough matchup. We've already seen them beat teams like Wesleyan, like Swarthmore. They're going to be battle tested, I think, come tournament. Sneaky surprise run for Farmingdale State into the Sweet 16 incoming. I'm not sure, but they look like actual legit good team this year. That's been a good program for several years now. They've been in NCAA tournaments. I remember just like 3 or 4 years ago, they had a shot at the buzzer to beat, it was either Hampton Sydney or Christopher Newport or something like that. Maybe that was Christopher Newport's championship team. I don't remember the details, obviously, but Farmingdale State's looking strong again this year, and that was an impressive big number win over Swarthmore this weekend.
Mm-hmm. Certainly shaping up to be a 2-team race there in the Skyline. Matt, Farmingdale and Yeshiva played just once in the regular season. That's going to be at Yeshiva, so going to be a really important one in that race. And then going to see, is someone going to stumble along the way? Going to be interesting to watch out. Definitely seem to be the cream of the crop there in the Skyline. For the East, Matt, Amherst was one of those teams we talked about last week that our efficiency ratings really liked, but had not yet received any top 25 votes. And while the computer still really likes them, I think what happened this past week was interesting. When we looked at them in last week's show, Amherst was the computer's number 4 overall team, but we noted obvious concerns with buying into that, particularly from the perspective of a top 25 human voter. I checked back in on Amherst's spot on Sunday when they had fallen to 10th, from 4th to 10th over that week. Not a huge drop, but it did come as a result of their overall adjusted efficiency margin falling by 2.1. And what was interesting to me about that is that Amherst didn't play at all this week, right? So that was entirely due to the computer maybe recontextualizing what they did as their other opponents played some games. Another interesting point, Matt, is that took them from ahead of Tufts in our efficiency ratings to behind Tufts. And Tufts also didn't play this week, right? So it wasn't that Tufts had a particularly, good performance that helped kind of, reshuffle that order. So Amherst and Tufts both didn't play this week. Maybe we're seeing some of that course correction that, frankly, we expected to see from Amherst. Already starting to take shape. It's going to be interesting to continue to watch that dynamic. Certainly, they will get tested in NESCAC play going to be really interested to see what happens as we get closer to that time.
Yeah, there were a lot of teams, I think maybe finals week, that didn't play this week. So last week's episode is probably still fresh if you haven't seen that one. But Amherst was one of those teams that is rated highly by the computer, hasn't played a strong schedule yet. So their big number is by beating kind of middling to bad teams, probably more on the bad side, by big numbers. And if the computer starts seeing those teams that they beat as worse and worse and worse, then that starts to take some of the shine off of Amherst. So that's one of the difficulties about kind of trusting some of the teams who have, again, beaten up on less than competition by big numbers. And what we found kind of looking at the previous seasons is maybe those were like 50-50 as to which ones are going to be real and which ones are not. So yet to be seen if this one's real. But once they get into NESCAC play, those are true tests. So to keep up that big rating, they're going to have to do some work against that higher level competition.
All right, lead us off in the South.
Yeah, Zach, let's talk about NC Wesleyan. So North Carolina Wesleyan is off to a 7-2 start so far this season, but I was checking around on schedule pages. I was sort of surprised to see they're a little bit of a unique setup there, at least to me. They've only played 4 games against fully fledged Division III teams. They have a win over Randolph. They have a win over Bridgewater, Virginia, and they have lost to Guilford and lost to Christopher Newport. These are their only games. There are only 4 so far that will count for like NPI purposes. But they've played a bunch of games against non-NPI countable competition. So some of those are against provisional teams who are transitioning to Division III. Johnson and Wales, Charlotte, and then they've played Regent twice. They've won all 3 of those games. So teams that are in the process of joining Division III from outside of the NCAA. They've also played non-Division III Mid-Atlantic Christian and Newport News Apprentice. I know North Carolina is not an area that's super densely populated with Division III teams, so it's not surprising they will have some of these games. It was just kind of surprising to me that they had so many. 5 of these games, more than half of their 9 games now, are against these kind of non-NPI countable competitions. So 7-2 overall, but it's kind of like, well, what's the level of competition they've really played here? Not quite sure yet. But from here on out, they're all in division. They're going to play Mary Washington on Monday, the day this episode drops. Then they'll play Piedmont at the end of the month. Then come January, they're all in the USA South Conference competition. So interesting, 7-2, kind of caught my eye. NC Wesleyan, really surprising to see kind of a mixed bag of kind of what types of games they're actually playing here. So they're going to have to get the ball rolling here against D3 teams. But I think in the USA South, I think they're set up well. I think they're probably still one of the favorites there. So still could be in the mix for NC Wesleyan. Not really a conference that gets a lot of at-large bids anyway, so maybe the NPI factor is not going to be a big deal as far as giving up those opportunities to build a resume there. So 7-2, I think that's good. 2-2 versus Division III, so that's a little bit more so-so.
And worth pointing out, as you mentioned, those games against provisional competition are not going to factor into their NPI, right? So as we get to the tournament metrics, tournament selection and seeding, that kind of thing, not going to be impacted. But those games are included in the computer efficiency ratings at d3datacast.com. So like, we do learn something about North Carolina Wesleyan, at least in terms of, the computer efficiency rating from those games. And Matt, just looking at it, they're a big time favorite right now, according to the computer, in the USA South landscaping there, with a pretty healthy adjusted efficiency margin lead over the likes of Pfeiffer, Mary Baldwin, and the like. So, that's one that, hey, go back to that conference champion draft that we do in the preseason. This was a conference I went with, and maybe at this point I'd like to make a different decision. I have Pfeiffer on the board here, so going to see what happens. But North Carolina Wesleyan certainly looking very good in the USA South. All right, for my South play here, Matt, I'm going to go with Mary Hardin Baylor, who admittedly hasn't been a team that I've checked in on a whole lot so far this season. But shout out to True to the Crew. They had a tweet on Sunday that caught my eye. They put out a nice graphic for the Crew's matchup with Concordia, Texas, featuring each team's numbers from our efficiency ratings. And I thought, that offensive number looks pretty good for Mary Hardin Baylor. Sure enough, Mary Hardin Baylor entered the game ranked 14th in the country in our adjusted offensive efficiency rating. That fell a little bit after Sunday's game, but hard to feel bad about that coming out of a 96-82 win. So good things apparently going on there offensively for Mary Hardin Baylor. And again, shout out to True to the Crew for using some of our numbers and helping inform their audience about that matchup.
Yeah, that's been cool to see. And Mary Hardin Baylor was a team I didn't check out on early, but they started 0-2. They lost to Trinity, Texas, and then LeTourneau. Since then, they've put together, they have a good schedule. They've played a lot of good teams. Been a little bit of a mix of wins and losses. They've lost to Trinity, Texas now twice. They've lost to St. Thomas, Texas one, but they've also beaten Whitworth. And the win against Concordia, Texas, I think looks pretty good. So I think they're putting together a good resume. That's a good, solid team. And I think they've played one of the more difficult schedules in Division III, definitely like a top 100-ish schedule, the top 25%. So they will be tested when they come into the ASC in ASC play. That's really a small conference this year, so they have to play a bunch of these non-conference games. But they'll be a dangerous team if they can get through the ASC, team that can beat kind of anyone in the country. I think they've kind of showed that already, beating Whitworth and teams like that, and being competitive at least on the road against St. Thomas, Texas, and against at Trinity, Texas. I think that was a 5-point game as well.
All right, let's wrap up this week's 4-point play looking west.
Yeah, Zach. I've talked, but maybe both of us have talked about Gustavus Adolphus, how they were the first team out of the tournament last year. And they were a team I was kind of hesitant on in the preseason. It looked like they were turning over maybe some of the roster. Wasn't sure what to make of them. Wasn't sure what to make of the MIAC entirely. But the Gusties have started the season on a mission, I think. They're 8-1 in their first 9 games. This week's win, they had one game this week. It was a 15-point win over St. John's. St. John's was the team that they were even within the standings at the top of the MIAC last year. St. John's, of course, also graduated a bunch of players. Their lone loss in the season now is a 2-point loss to Whitworth, a really solid Whitworth team, a team that had been getting votes. I'm not sure if they actually cracked the top 25 or not, but that was a good team. They lost to them by 2, and that's their only loss. As I said, I wanted to wait and see. Spoiler alert, I'm done waiting. They're in my top 25 now. I have really high expectations for them right now. I think they look like the class of the MIAC going into conference play or at the start of conference play here. So really excited to see what Gustavus Adolphus can do this season. They look really strong to me. Wanted to shout them out today.
It's fun to see after a tough luck result to finish last season, being that first team left out of the tournament, to come back and be right there and seem to be in position. I think we saw kind of a similar dynamic play out in Division III football, where a year ago, if memory serves correctly, Wheaton was like the first or second team left out of that playoff. They were able to get in this year and make a nice playoff run. So fun to see that when there's kind of a tough bump in the road for a program like that to be able to bounce back and to be right back in position. Good to see there from the Gusties. Matt, I'm going to use my last spot here to highlight DePauw, as geographically questionable as it may be, using this as the West here. But, spoiler alert, I think you kind of referred to it earlier, but we will have more to say about the NCAAC later in this episode. It looks to be an absolute dogfight of a race, but DePauw is looking good at the top very early. They added a win over Worcester this week to get themselves off to a 3-0 start. And that includes a win at Wabash, who also looks like, a conference contender there. Of course, it was a big start to the week as Tigers guard Brady Kunka appeared on the QCast. Be sure to check that out. QCast Season 6, Episode 8. If you haven't already, go back and listen to that and, give Bob a click on that YouTube subscribe button. Let's keep building up the QCast there.
I think it would be really difficult to handicap the NCAC race. I think there's a bunch of good teams in the mix. It's going to be a conference where a bunch of teams are rated highly, and it's going to be interesting to see, can someone skate through with a really good record, or are those top 3 or 4 or however many teams going to beat up on each other? And so teams, you're kind of maybe unimpressed by the records, but then come tournament or whatever, you realize there's still a bunch of strong teams there, that they're just all at kind of an even level. So really fascinated to see what comes of the new look NCAC.
So it's a little bit of what caught our eye or was on our minds this past week as we were watching another week of the season play out. Some of it may or may not factor into this week's top 25, in particular your ballot, Matt. So we have another poll coming out on Monday. Take us through your ballot for this week, if you would.
Yeah, I counted quickly. I believe about 15 of my top 25 teams did not have a game this week. So I think there are very few changes. I'll try to say off the top of my head, I think maybe I took Mount Union up a couple of spots. They had that good win. Their win against Muskingum was maybe one of the one of the better wins, I think, that were out there in D3 of kind of top 25 contender-ish teams. So they looked good. I think that maybe the one big change, Illinois Wesleyan falls out of my ballot. They lost another game. They lost at Elmhurst. Again, not a terrible loss. I think Elmhurst is going to be pretty good, but I think for Illinois Wesleyan, they've started to rack up maybe too many of those games where they haven't. They lost against North Central. They lost against Elmhurst. That's 2 losses in a row. They had the overtime, even if it was a overtime win at Carthage. Again, don't apologize for a win, anything this season. They also had the loss to UW Stout before that. So that's just too many from what I still think is a good team that I pulled them out, and that made room to bring Gustavus Adolphus in. Otherwise, I think the other 24 teams stay, and they all stay pretty close to where they were. Like I mentioned, a bunch of them either didn't play or ended up kind of beating teams I expected them to beat by about how many they beat. So a little bit of a ho-hum week as far as changes in the top 25. Really just that one team out and one team in. And I think we just talked about Illinois Wesleyan, and I talked about Gustavus on the previous slide.
And, maybe it was offline discussions as we've talked, Matt, about your ballot. I know that you've talked about it. Kind of we're at the point of the year where you feel like everyone deserves or everyone gets a mulligan as it relates to Illinois Wesleyan. Maybe it's just, one mulligan too many at this point. Is that kind of how you're feeling?
Yeah. I think it's just they started so strong. They had a really good resume at the beginning of the season. They beat University of Chicago, who I still think is really good. They had a nice win, their home tournament against UW Oshkosh to kind of cap that off. I think that was a good, solid weekend. And then they went and they looked really good at the Albion tournament, in which they were clearly the best team. The other teams were kind of overmatched. They feel like won both of those games by 40. And then since then, it's been difficult. I know Josh Fridman has been out, their point guard. He really makes a big difference for them. So if he's back soon, I think that maybe would help them start winning games to bump them up. If he's out long term, I think that's maybe it's shown that it's been a challenge for them. But I think since that Albion tournament, it's been the UW Stout loss, it's been an overtime win against Carthage, and then it was a North Central loss, and it was a Elmhurst loss. I think all on the road, those last 3 games. The Stout loss was at home, but then the last 3 games were on the road to start CCIW play. That's difficult, but maybe turn a couple of these into wins. I still think they're a good team. They're just not a top 25 team for me. They're more like a number 35 team. And we've said for weeks now, those teams are all kind of close. So I don't think it'll take a lot if they turn the corner, be the team who I think they're going to be. But right now, I think it's time to take a little bit of a timeout.
And last week you were on with Ryan Scott on Hoopsville's top 25 segment. And I feel like listening back to that, one of the themes was there's a few teams where you have plenty of reason to believe they are or can be very good. Whether that be Illinois Wesleyan, I think maybe Redlands is in that camp, like a Roanoke, right? So there's one of the common themes seem to be that there's this collection of teams that you feel like is very good, or you still believe will be very good, and could see them making some sort of deep tournament run come tournament time. But it's like where we sit right here with the results on the table, it's like a little bit difficult in how you treat them. I don't know. It was just kind of interesting. Your reaction, that was one of the themes as I was hearing you and Ryan talk about, your voting dynamics, your ballots, and just some of the teams you're struggling with.
Yeah, and I think so. And just to take the Elmhurst game, I thought that was going to be a close game. And in some ways, there's not a big difference there's all the difference in the world, but if they win that game by 1 or lose the game by 1, from a how good are these two teams standpoint, there's almost no difference in that. The win-loss, though, does make a big difference. But some teams, I think, are really good, even though the computer might be saying they're like 30, 35, 40, somewhere in that range. But I think by my perception or my eye test, no, they're like a number 15 type team. But when you start getting results that reaffirm the computer's perception of 35, then after a while I start to maybe erode away my personal opinion, maybe more toward where the computer's mark is. And that's where I am. I think I could be similar on a team like Redlands coming up if they have a really big week ahead of them, if I think out in Virginia. And if they don't get quite the results that maybe I think is possible, then they could be a team that starts to be looking on the outside, or goes the other way, right? Maybe the results start matching up with maybe a top 20 or top 10 expectation for them, and then they start jumping up my ballot. So I think both are possible.
When last week's poll was released, I believe there was 5 teams that were new to the poll that week, I tried to do a little bit of just quick look back at previous years for that time of the year for that third in season poll. What is it usually like in terms of the number of teams coming out versus coming in? And that does seem like that's atypically high, right? I think last year there was four, but going back, it was more like two or three, right? And I think that's just indicative of the type of season that it is, that we knew that it would be. That you just have so many options as a voter that anytime there's a little bit of hiccup, it's like, well, I'd love to give you the benefit of the doubt, maybe, but I have other options to vote for. And so we're seeing a little bit of more shuffling in and out, especially as you've talked about how, maybe from like 10 on down, there's just not a lot of difference
Yeah.
between some of those teams that are maybe in the middle point of your ballot and the teams that are, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever it is on your watch list.
Yeah, and you're right. When it gets tight like that, small differences or somewhat minor results can take a team out and another team in, or slide you around a few spots. So yeah, that definitely happens.
All right, so let's get into the big topic for this week. We're going to zoom out a little bit from the team view, take more of a conference view. So right now, through play on December 13th, 2025, taking all of those D3 versus D3 results into account, the top conferences so far, let's start at number 10 with the Landmark.
Yeah, actually through games of December 14th through Sunday, I think we have the data here. But yes, that is still the Landmark at number 10. And I think it's a really good jump up for the Landmark this year. I'm going to call out Scranton as the big, if you wanted to say, like, what's the one reason why Landmark takes a big jump, I think it's Scranton. The last 2 years, they've been like in the 200s last year and maybe in the 300s the year before. They had taken a little bit of a rebuild, and this year they look quite strong, 7-1. Our computer has them in the top 40, I think number 35. And we know Catholic has been good for the last several years. Drew's put together some good seasons. So I think another team joining that kind of upper echelon in the conference of Scranton. I think that's oversimplifying the whole thing, but that makes a big difference when you have a team that's in the bottom half of Division III and then jumps back into the top 10% or so of Division III. We know that's a school that's had a really strong women's basketball program the last several years, and the men's team has now taken a jump back up to where they were previously. They've had some really strong seasons, and I think the dip as far down was a little bit of the anomaly here, but they've been strong. Catholic looks like they've stayed strong, so a lot of strong records at the top, and I think a lot of quality here for the Landmark.
And with over 400 Division III men's basketball playing schools, top 100 is an easy line to draw for identifying like the top quartile. And so that's easy to see here. Susquehanna just on the outside of that top 100, but within the top quartile overall at 102. So that's getting five deep, and then even Wilkes not that far behind, right? So you're getting into the solid middle of the league, all being in that top 100-ish range, plus or minus depending on the day maybe.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a common theme as we go through here, where you're seeing a depth of those top 100 or better teams really getting stacked up into at least kind of the midpoint of these conferences.
And I should say, for the Spotify listeners or anyone who just wants to see a bigger version of this, d3datacast.com, go to the efficiency ratings tab at the top link bar, go down to conference ratings. You can see all the conferences ranked, or you can click on the links, the conference links at the top, and it'll take you to that conference's page. It'll give you the view that we're showing for the YouTube viewers on the screen here.
Mm-hmm. And on d3datacast.com, we also have a blog post set up that has every episode embedded in there. And within there, we started linking to our Google Slides so you can see, obviously for the updated view, you want to go to the webpage as Matt's describing, but if you want to see any slides specific to what we used in an episode, those are all available as a link there as well.
And I just like to add in, Zach, Landmark, I said it was a big jump up for them. Last year, they finished number 25 as a conference. So just outside the top half, and this year up to the top 10. So really, really big jump for the Landmark.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to number 9. We see the New Mac.
Yeah, this is, I think, kind of been around where the NUMAC has been the last several years. I can recall the last time we did an episode of like ranking the top 10 conferences, the NUMAC was kind of in that mix as well here. Last year they finished number 11, so checking it at number 9. It's been kind of steady Eddie for the NUMAC here as kind of a top 10-ish type conference in Division 3, upper 25%. Led at the top by, and you mentioned like the top 100 as a good line for what is the upper quartile. I think another easy line is the top 200, kind of saying the top half of Division 3. And here you can say NUMAC going really deep in that regard, 7 teams deep. And then you still have some quality with like a Springfield and Coast Guard displaying some good records there underneath that line. But I think it's a deep conference, not just at the top. I know WPI's been in the top 25 and been getting a lot of votes, but even outside of that, teams like Babson and Salve and Clark are able to play with and beat. And Clark plays a strong schedule. They've beaten a bunch of games. They've taken some losses as well at 6-4, but they have strong teams, a lot of depth here. And MIT, that 7th ranked team, I think is a program that feels like they're once again back on the rise after kind of being not in the basement of Division 3, but at a lot lower level than we were used to seeing them.
Yeah, that's great. That's exactly what I was going to point out there. It just, even at 165, MIT giving a little bit more of a boost to the league overall, compared to, maybe where they've been the last couple of years. Number 8 conference we've already talked about here, the OAC, maintaining, a top 10 status here, even when you take John Carroll out of the mix.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, Zach, because the way we're doing these conference ratings, we're just doing an average of all the conference members and saying that's what your average rating is and then ranking them. When you take a team like John Carroll, who has been so good and so strong, out of the mix, you think that just automatically drops your overall conference rating because that removes some good quality here. And that's true. But there's still a lot to like about the OAC. It wasn't just the John Carroll show, or it wasn't just the John Carroll Mount Union. That's a conference with a lot of programs that runs very deep. It's only been 4 seasons since Marietta was in a Final Four. So it's been really good. You look at the bottom 2 teams in the conference right now, Wilmington and Heidelberg, they're just below that top 200 line. So even the lower ranked teams are that's about the level we saw UW Stout, right? And we were surprised at that win that they had against Illinois Wesleyan. So these are still the types of teams, the types of rankings of teams that can beat almost anyone in the country. Wilmington and Heidelberg are still about average Division III teams, and they're at the bottom of the OAC. That's just a level of depth that the league has, and it also has a good amount of quality at the top, as you can see. We talked about Mount Union and Muskingum and Otterbein, and it's just a lot of kind of that middle class of the conference is really deep and strong.
And you talked about Mount Union with the wins already over Otterbein and Muskingum. And then you just got to look at the overall efficiency ranks right now, Matt. Those are the top 3 pretty clearly there before you get into Ohio Northern at 143, Capital at 156, Marietta at 166. So maybe a little bit of separation there between, maybe the top 3, but compared to the NUMAC, you get a group that's pretty well densely populated between like that 140 to like kind of the midpoint ish area of Division 3 as a whole. So when your bottom team is still a pretty average team overall in terms of Division 3, that's like the depth of the conference that is really helping, I think, put the OAC here, not to mention having like a 3rd ranked Mount Union according to the computer so far, right? So you got what the computer sees so far as an elite team and just really good kind of top half depth, top to bottom.
Yeah, and that's, I think, probably true for all the conferences we're going to talk about this week, but this maybe lends itself to the potential for a lot of carnage in conference play as these teams beat up on each other. We'll have to see how it plays out, but that's kind of what it looks like to me. OAC number 6 last year to number 8 this year, so that's a level of consistency, even without John Carroll, that the league's pretty well at the same level.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Let's go to number 7 here. This is an interesting one. The Little East Conference. That's kind of been the Keene State show here the last few years. But here, Little East showing up at number 7, and that it's not really because of Keene State. It's because of what's been going on in addition to them.
Yeah, you take a team who had been pretty consistently in the top 25 with just some great players that had now shuffled through the program. Still a really quality program, but not at that level. And yet the conference as a whole, this is not the example of like a Scranton taking a big jump. It just feels like everyone in the conference, kind of outside of Keene State, has lifted their level of play this year. We mentioned Eastern Connecticut in last week's episode as one of the best teams that had not received any top 25 votes. Mass Dartmouth has had a really strong start to the season. Rhode Island College sporting a nice 7-3 record. Keene's still pretty good there, with their record's only 4-5, but they've played some really tough games. They've still won some of those good games as well. So a pretty good level of depth. 8 teams that goes in the top 200 isn't something I would have been surprised at. It felt like it was a league that was really top heavy the last couple of years, like maybe a Keene State and maybe a Western Connecticut or someone that was maybe also in that mix. Maybe like a 1 or 2 teams in the top 100 is kind of my perception of what the league has been. But this year, just a level of quality and depth all throughout that's really impressive.
3 in the computer's top 50, none of them being Keene State. Not what I think of when I think of the Little East Conference. And you mentioned Eastern Connecticut, one of those teams we highlighted in last week's episode. If I'm remembering correctly, Matt, I think Rhode Island College was maybe going to be one of those teams until, the weekend play kind of shifted some things around and Rhode Island College fell out of that, top 10 that we were looking at. But another one that is, maybe earning their way onto some radars, for voters. As the computer continues to like what they are doing there. I think Mass Dartmouth and Rhode Island College both fell off of that list just with some late shifting, right? Yeah. So Eastern Connecticut definitely has company in terms of that context we were talking about last week with some teams that the computer is really liking that maybe haven't drawn the attention from top 25 voters that perhaps they deserve so far.
Yeah, and Zach, this is another conference that made a big jump. Last year they finished number 17 overall, and here we see them sitting at number 7.
Number 6 is no stranger to top conferences list. This is maybe a little bit lower than we're used to seeing. That's the ODAC.
Yeah, ODAC at number 6. I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago they were kind of in that upper number 3, number 4 kind of a range. This year they've taken a little bit of a step to number 6. Although last year, Zach, I did have it down here. They finished number 7, so kind of where they were last year as well. It's been maybe 2 years at this level, but still really good at the top. Randolph, Macon, Roanoke, Hampton, Sydney. I think maybe where they lose out is they don't have right now that 4th team that's maybe quite in the mix. I know the voters still like Virginia Wesleyan, but the computers have seen them a little bit more mildly. Washington and Lee, though, I think is a program that is back on the rise. I think they're looking really good. Guilford, not quite where they were a few years ago when they were in the Final Four, but the ODAC runs really deep. The quality does fall off a little bit with 3 or 4 teams under the kind of average mark, but still, when you're talking about a 12-team league, that means you still go 9 teams deep at the average or better mark. So a lot of depth here from the ODAC still, even if the bottom isn't quite strong.
Mm-hmm. And I talked a couple of weeks ago how I felt like there was much more of a middle class of the ODAC than maybe there has been in years past. Unfortunately, as it relates to, seeing the ODAC as one of the top leagues, maybe some of that middle class has come from, maybe a Guilford going through a coaching change. There's a big transition happening there. And maybe them or like you're saying, Virginia Wesleyan isn't quite where the human voters, might have them. So it's maybe a little bit more, or maybe it's a combination of some teams that were maybe like ODAC tier 1, kind of maybe falling a tier as it is teams towards the bottom, kind of improving their way into it. But still, 6 teams inside the top 100. Lynchburg and Averett just outside, still in the top 150. And then Shenandoah, you're going 9 deep before you're really getting around that midpoint in terms of the Division III landscape overall. It's a big conference, and they can go as deep as anyone. And maybe it's just that they've got even more teams that slot in at the bottom. 10, 11, 12.
Yeah, and we know the ODAC tournament is one of the more fun tournaments every year. If you took like the top 8 here and did a full like quarterfinal, you can see that this is why we sometimes see carnage. Is you have really good teams that can fill out. You can go 8 deep, right? And you can play these games, and you wouldn't be surprised if Virginia Wesleyan, right? The human voters like them, but if Washington and Lee or even Guilford upset one of these top teams and is playing in a final, like we saw Guilford, it's kind of hard to do in the NPI age. But we saw Guilford play their way into the tournament by making a deep run in the ODAC tournament last year. And I think this is, again, the type of field that could do very similar as well.
Well, we're talking about Guilford. They've gone from one of the slowest tempo teams in Division III to one of the fastest here, based on, what's played so far, the number 5 team for tempo, which was to be expected.
Yep.
Bringing in a new coach that's bringing in a totally new style. We knew Guilford was going to be playing much differently than they had in the past, but you just see that stark contrast right there, going from one of the slowest to one of the fastest very, very quickly. Here just 5 weeks or 5-6 weeks into the season.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, our top 10 hits the top half here with number 5 conference we've talked about a little bit already here, the NCAC.
Yeah. So again, we mentioned it with OAC, but adding John Carroll into the mix, I think definitely helps you as you start averaging out those team ratings. You get another top 100 team into the mix. I think that's really good. But you look at just like where DePauw is, Wabash, Denison, Wittenberg, John Carroll. That's 5 teams kind of in that top 60 or 70 range. Even though we don't have any that are really, really vying for a no doubt top 25 spot, you still have just a mash of teams. I wouldn't be surprised about any 5 of those teams if you told me at the end of the year one of those teams wins the NCAC. I have no idea who it's going to be. I think it's really rare that you get like maybe a true 5-team race, what looks like a 5-team race. And that's not to say that a team like Worcester is not going to win some of those games against some of those teams. They just look like there's maybe a tier below right now. But a really strong and deep NCAC, like when have like Oberlin and Kenyon both been in the top 200 as well. Really, really strong, solid league up at the number 5, a top 5 spot. This kind of harkens back to the days when you had like Worcester and Wittenberg both being kind of top 10 national teams. It's a different shape of an NCAC, but that maybe has that level of power back to it to some degree.
You talk about how that's a very different shape. Here's a comparison that came to my mind. I want to see if you feel like this is a hot take or this works. When I look at this NCAC field, this gives me vibes of what we've seen. Maybe not so much so far this year, but going back the last 2 or 3 years with the American Rivers Conference.
Yeah.
Right. It's a conference that it's going 5 or 6 deep. With maybe a couple that are getting their way into the top 25, but you feel like you got 5 options, and probably the best of the best maybe is a top 25 team, but you don't know like which of the 5 or 6 on any given week to choose. That's kind of the vibes I'm getting from the NCAC field right now.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that very similarly rated field. I think maybe one of the difference is the NCAC to me has played a pretty tough schedule and taken some losses where maybe some of those American Rivers Conference teams, the year they got, what did they get, 4 into the tournament? I think their non-conference was maybe lacking some really top quality wins. And the NCAC's played some really tough games that maybe they haven't always won. Like Wabash lost a tough game to Wash U, for example, is one I can recall. But yeah, I think as far as the quality and depth of the league, I think that's very similar.
You talk about the dynamic of John Carroll leaving the OAC, coming into the NCAC here, Matt. I don't know that we would have thought at this point in the year the computer sees them as the number 5 team in the conference.
Yeah, but I think that's a sign of how many teams are of a quality. I think if you had said that they were number 66 by the computer, you'd say, okay, they're in the top 3 of that league. They might be number 2. They might even be number 1. Who knows? But what we've seen from DePauw, Wabash, Denison, Wittenberg, like that whole group there, kind of really even performances so far this season. Last year they checked in at number 9. Here they jump into the top 5. So NCAC on the rise.
Mm-hmm. I think you can credit the addition of John Carroll as well as I think probably the where Oberlin and Kenyon maybe rank right here compared to where they typically see, and just kind of everyone raising their level a little bit gets the NCAC from number 9 to number 5 so far. Going to be an interesting one to check in maybe at the end of the season, see how this all kind of shakes in, because I think we're in for, like I said earlier, an absolute dogfight of a conference season. It's going to be a fun one to watch. Let's go number 4, the CCIW.
Yeah, CCIW, historically one of the top conferences, and once again, we see them at number 4 this year. Last year, they finished at number 5, so very similar range, maybe a little bit of a step up. Maybe a difference in some of the CCIW conferences of yesteryear is we don't have one of those teams that's a surefire kind of top 10, top 5 kind of team this year. We have a bunch of really good teams, a bunch of really, really good teams, the whole conference above average, the whole conference in the top 200, 7 out of the 9 teams in the top 100. So a league full of teams who can beat anyone on any given night. The problem is they might be beating each other on any given night, and they likely are. And without a really top or one, two, or three teams that are really in that top level national mix, it could be a kind of another weird season for the CCIW where maybe they're a one bid league, or maybe they find a way to get two teams in. But I know there were some CCIW seasons. I don't know how many years, 5-10 years ago, where they would get 3-4 teams into the field. And it kind of hasn't been that way the last few years, but it's not because the CCIW is really any worse than it was. It's just maybe traded some depth for some of that top quality, or maybe that's just the difference between being the number 2 conference and being the number 4 conference. Is everyone just bumps up that much higher of a level, and that's what gets you multiple teams into the tournament.
Go all the way down to the bottom. Wheaton checking in at 139. That's easily the highest ranking of any of the teams at the bottom of the conference efficiency ratings list so far. Again, speaking to that overall depth, when you're going all the way down to the bottom and you're only getting down to number 139.
Yeah.
There's certainly the depth of the league is doing a lot of lifting here. Even if that number at the top is only a 42.
Yeah, and these last two conferences, CCIW, NCAC, and then kind of going up to the Little East, I think it shows you that sometimes top quality conferences have as much or more to do with how deep you go of really good teams than how highly rated is your best team or two. There are some conferences that have a team in the top 5 or top 10 that aren't in this top 10 list because their quality falls off pretty hard. The CCIW, one of the reasons why they don't have anyone go undefeated for whatever the time period is now, like ever, is because it's almost impossible to go through the schedule home and away and win against everyone who's above average night in and night out. It's just, there's so much depth. It's so difficult to win these games. If you go through and you have 2 or 3 losses, that's a really, really good season. And it's just even a measure of the depth, not just how good are those teams. It's that they're all that good.
Maybe the CCIW will go to a single round robin.
They should do that. Yeah.
All right, let's go into the top 3. Number 3, the WIAC.
Yeah, WIAC at number 3. Last year, they also finished number 3, so this is where they have been. And once again, you see that there's a lot of depth here. In contrast to the CCIW, Stout and River Falls at the bottom are a little bit lower rated, but you do get some of the more kind of top 25-ish quality here from the WIAC than you do at the CCIW. And I think from just kind of looking at an NPI standpoint, the records that those top 4 teams have put together, 10-0, 7-1, 7-0, 7-1, I think sets the WIAC really well to get 3 or 4 teams into the tournament, assuming that there's not too much carnage in the league. But here you get a good measure of depth and you get a good measure of top level quality. So I think this is kind of what we come to expect from the WIAC. They're going to be kind of a top 3 conference year in and year out. And here they are once again at number 3.
And that's even with a couple of teams in lacrosse and Oshkosh that maybe so far in the early going, a human voter or just kind of fan perception is a little bit higher on than the computer efficiency rating. So, perhaps even some more room to grow here for a WIAC if some of those teams start, looking in the computer rankings like they've looked in some of the polls to date so far. And I don't think that there was any reason to think those polls or human voters are necessarily wrong on lacrosse. It's just for whatever reason, it's not necessarily showing up. Maybe that's just, closer games than what the computer expects, or, some of these other ones, as we've talked about, where the computer really likes seeing some of those big margins.
Yeah.
So perhaps even some room to gain. Although, as we're going to talk about with these next two, Matt, there's perhaps a little bit of a big hill to climb to overtake either one of them. So let's go on to number 2 with the NESCAC here. Another one that's just got some crazy depth, going 10 deep inside the top 100 before you get to Hamilton out at 276. But, going from number 1 to number 99 in your 1 through 10, you can forgive one for maybe currently being outside the top half of Division III overall.
Yeah, here at the top, Trinity, we expect they have a massive rating. They were really good last year, national champs, obviously, and overwhelming preseason favorites. They're great. Tufts, I think, is kind of rounding back into form after starting the season 0-2, now 7-2, and I think they're looking more like the team we thought they were. We mentioned some skepticism on Amherst. It's not because this is the show of Amherst haters. It's just because if you look at the strength of schedules here, they're like a number 350 overall strength of schedule. For a good team, a good program from a good conference, I think we just wish there was a little bit more to hang their hat on there, a little bit more quality. So I think we're wait and see. And we wouldn't be altogether shocked if maybe that rating falls a little bit, but they're not going to be a bad program by any measure. They're going to be some level of good. It's just we're skeptical of that they're top 10 good at this point. We'll have to see. I think Bates is an interesting program, a good story here. 7-0. Not a terrible strength of schedule, kind of a 150th strength of schedule. I think I'm really excited to see what do they do when they start playing NESCAC level teams. We know Wesleyan is good, but that's 5 deep that the computer thinks is kind of top 25-ish. And even if you as a human are a little bit skeptical of some of those computer ratings, given some teams' strength of schedules, yeah, I think you can all say that those are still good teams and good programs. So whether you thought they were number 10 or number 50, it's almost immaterial to this discussion. There's still a bunch of really good, strong NESCAC teams. That also makes for a fun top 8 in a tournament. It's another where anyone can win, and that just becomes fun at the end of the season. Would love to see them play everyone twice or go to play most teams twice. I know there's some schools that do play that second game, but just a single round robin for the NESCAC. I think they're the only conference that plays a true single round robin, maybe I guess outside of the coast to coast, who plays no true conference schedule. So at least the NESCAC plays everyone once.
Round robin.
Yeah, plays no round robin. But there's just so many fun matchups here. It would be fun for everyone to play, multiple games against these other teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you think about an 18 tournament. Trinity, Connecticut is a behemoth. But if they have to face a first round game against a Colby, a Williams, a Conn College, however that comes out, that's going to be quite a quarterfinal that no one else really probably has to face in Division III. And again, if it feels like we're being harsh on Amherst, part of that is just because this is a song that we've heard before, going back kind of the last couple years of them really looking like a computer darling early on, only to fall off as sort of like a middle of the standings type NESCAC team, which is still, again, good.
It's good, still good.
It's not top 10 good. Right?
And I understand you get enough quality in the conference that you don't need to play the most difficult non-conference schedule. But you're Amherst, you're in the NESCAC, like you can play some reasonable teams. You can play some reasonable teams. And I should, while we're here. By and large, NESCAC teams do. If you look at a lot of these other strength of schedule numbers on the screen. Right. So this is just, a program here or there that maybe is not willing to venture as far from home or, take on as many challengers as some others. Yeah, exactly. And while we're on this screen, I just want to call out Trinity's plus 53 efficiency margin rating is insane. Like the Buzz Anthony Randolph-Macon national champions, I think we're plus 38. So it just in relation to the middle of Division III, Trinity is putting up numbers that we have not seen since I've been tracking these types of efficiency ratings. It's crazy right now.
Right. Yeah, I think these look a lot more like what you typically see from the top programs on the women's basketball side. You think about how dominant some of those are compared to the rest of the landscape. That's kind of the air that Trinity is in right now.
Yeah, and it's crazy in a we've been talking about how much parity there is, which in theory should bring these numbers down. But for Trinity, they seem to be breaking away from the whole rest of the group here and kind of making their own tier almost at the top.
That leaves one conference, and probably close observers know which one is coming at this point. Number one, the UAA. We talk about the depth of top 100 teams a lot as we've gone through here, Matt. 1 through 8 is almost entirely in the computer's top 50. Just Brandeis at 51 outside of that currently. The UAA always has a ton of depth, and this looks like it may even be a banner year for a conference that is really known for its depth.
Yeah, last year's number 2 conference is now number 1. They switched places with the NESCAC. And every team is great. We talk about how crazy it is that maybe all 8 UAAs would be in the top 100. Right now, they're all in the top 50. I think we joked in an early episode that NYU was at that point looking like the third or fourth team in the UAA, but we thought that they might still be only like number 40 overall in the country. And that's kind of what's coming out here, is you can be fifth in the UAA and still be a top kind of 35 or 40 team in the country. Even Rochester at number 6 in the UAA is by the computer a top 40 team in the country. So, one of the differences between the NESCAC, which I'll quickly page back to, and the UAA is the difference between 8 teams and 12 teams. If you added 4 teams at the bottom here, then it might look a little bit more like the NESCAC. But the UAA also has to play the double round robin. So they're going to play all these difficult games twice. It's 8 teams that are all really good. They're all the type of team that could be the best team in another conference. Like if you throw Brandeis in that also top 5 NCAC, they look like the other teams that are at the top, that top group there. It's just that there was a bunch of those teams. And that is the 8th place team. UAA looks crazy right now. They've been crazy for several years. This is a conference that could get 4 or 5 teams into the national tournament. They've all been winning a lot of these non-conference games. Down through NYU, they have only 1 loss or fewer. And then down to Rochester only has the 2nd loss. They're all above 500, and they've all played kind of top half or better schedules. So they're playing teams, they're beating teams. They look really good. They are really good. UAA is the number 1 conference so far this season.
It'll be fun to keep track of it. I feel like we're going to get to the end of the season, and there's going to be someone who has what doesn't look like a very good conference record, but the computer is going to continue to see them like a fairly good team because they're going to be probably hanging in some games that they weren't expected to win anyway, just because, like if you look at like a Brandeis or a Case Western Reserve, the computer's not going to really see them as a favorite in most games, except for, maybe a handful, a few home games. And so maybe that computer rating doesn't really fall off a whole lot, even if they have like a, 3-11 conference record.
Yeah. That's right.
Okay, so that's the top 10 as it stands in the computer ratings today. Matt, I think there was a couple others from last year's top 10 at the end of the season that you wanted to highlight. Let's just go through at the end of last season. I think you made reference to some of these. Number 1 was the NESCAC. Number 2 was the UAA. Number 3 was the WIAC. Number 4 was the NJAC. Currently number 13. That's a conference that we've talked about the last few weeks. Just not having kind of an NJAC type season or what we've come to expect from the NJAC. Number 5 last season was the CCIW. 6, the OAC. 7, the ODAC. Number 8 was the ASC. Currently number 14, so not that far out. What's left of the ASC, not that far outside the top 10 currently at number 14. Number 9, we talked about the NCAC making a jump up from number 9 last year. Number 10 last year was the Coast to Coast Conference. Currently number 23, which is a pretty big drop, but that's largely impacted by the addition of 2 provisionals, which are included in the efficiency ratings calculations, even though those are not games that are going to be counting towards anything that has to do with tournament selection or seeding in terms of NPI. But the D3 Datacast computer efficiency ratings do account for those provisional members. And so that when you kind of add those at the bottom of the C2C, really kind of change the dynamic of that league overall. And that's largely what's the change in bringing them from 10 at the end of last season down to number 23 currently.
Yeah, we've made the decision to include JWU, Charlotte, and Regent in our efficiency ratings as provisional members because they're playing largely Division III schedules, playing these Division III teams, so it provides more information on their quality and some quality of those Division III teams that they play. So that is affecting the rating, but you also add 2, at this point, not great teams to the bottom. That's going to bring it down. Also, maybe Christopher Newport is not quite the level they were last year. Mary Washington is still pretty good. So I guess the top is probably still overall like they were last year. You're just more or less adding 2 maybe bottom quartile teams to the mix.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go on to the picks. Should we talk picks?
Yeah, here's the picks from last week, Zach. A game we kind of talked about early in my 4-point play. Swarthmore at Farmingdale State. Zach, you had Farmingdale to cover the half-point line, and they won that game big, so you get the point there. Hardin-Simmons and LeTourneau were a pick'em. Zach, we both picked Hardin-Simmons, and they did win that game by 13, so we get the point there. Wartburg were 4-point underdogs at Loras and Loris won that game by 12. So Zach, you and I both get that point. Mount Union had a big line against Muskingum. We called that out. We thought the game was going to be closer. It was. We both were on the side of Muskingum. The computer had that as a 9.5-point line, but we both get the point there. And our D3 Datacast game of the week was Wabash and John Carroll. That was a 1.5-point line that favored John Carroll, but Wabash won that game by 4. So you and I both missed that point. So keeping track of our scores, Zach, you went 4-1. You bested me last week. You're now at 15, 14-1, going back above 500. I was just 3-2 last week, and I'm 22, 7-1 overall. So we love seeing people post on social media or post in the comments below on YouTube. They hit that thumbs up and they like the post and they post their picks. And so it's fun to see everyone playing along. So here's this week's picks against our computer ratings. I think it's a fun slate this week. Illinois Wesleyan at Wash U, first game. That's a 9.5-point line now in favor of Wash U. So this looks massive, Zach. Is that just too big of a number?
It is, and it looks massive. You think about what's happened in that matchup the last 2 years, where they've been really Illinois Wesleyan blowouts. If I think someone's going to win by 9.5 or more, I'm more inclined to think it's going to be Illinois Wesleyan than Wash U. Give me the points.
Yeah, Zach, exact same thing for the exact same reason. I'm going to take Illinois Wesleyan. 9.5 is just too big. I expect a close game, and it's been at least the last 2 seasons that Illinois Wesleyan has won this game big. I don't expect that this year, but we'll have to see. I think 9.5 is just too much, though. All right, Redlands going out to Virginia. They're going to play Roanoke and Hampton-Sydney, but this one's against Roanoke. Roanoke are 5-point favorites by our computer. What's your pick?
Yeah, it's a neutral court game at Hampton-Sydney, but much more like a home game for Roanoke than it would be for Redlands. So part of me wanted to think that, maybe I could gain on the computer's expectation based on that. But, getting 5 points with Redlands, I feel like this is going to be kind of a prove it weekend for them. I couldn't ultimately lay the 5 with Roanoke.
Yeah. We know Redlands did take a loss to Chapman, but they're going back out of conference, Zach. I'm a big proponent of Skyak theory when it comes to Redlands. I think 5-point, and it's a cross-country trip for them, but I think a 5-point margin is about right. But I'm now counting on Redlands to do Redlands things and cause Roanoke a little bit of panic. It'll be interesting now with Guilford in the mix in the ODAC if this will be kind of a good game for Roanoke. I actually don't have it if they've already played Guilford or not once, if that would help them, but kind of maybe some similarities in a faster paced style that you might find there in contrast to what we'd had in previous seasons. All right, our third game, Christopher Newport versus Emory, kind of a really fun Old South region matchup. Our computer line favors Emory by 0.5 point.
Yeah, so basically a pick 'em between two teams that maybe have had some uneven performances so far this season. But I mean, that being the case, in a pick 'em type game, when you've got a Jair Knight and a Ben Pierce on one side, I'll probably go with that side more often than not. Give me Emory.
Yeah, Zach, I'm going to take Emory as well. So we're going the same way on 3 games, kind of for similar reasons. Right now, Emory feels like a team I trust a little bit more. To me, Christopher Newport's trying to find themselves a little bit. I think this is a neutral site game, but 0.5 point. If it's just going to be a pick 'em, I'll pick Emory. All right, our fourth game is Mary Washington and St. Thomas. This is also a neutral site game, 1.5 point line favoring St. Thomas here. Zach, your pick.
Yeah, Mary Washington's interesting. I was thinking about this earlier today that Mary Washington has been a team that sometimes the computer has liked a lot more than say a human top 25 voter. I think this is one year where the human voter likes Mary Washington a lot more than the computer. I'm going to say that in both cases, the human voter has been the one that's right. So give me Mary Washington.
All right, interesting, Zach. I am also going with Mary Washington, so I think we've had 4 fun games here, and we've gone the same direction 4 times. I think we've seen Mary Washington play really well on a neutral court. When we saw them at the Great Lakes Invitational, they looked fantastic that weekend. St. Thomas was a team that I was maybe slow to vote for this year, but now have started to. I think this is a matchup of 2 teams in my top 25 ballot. But St. Thomas is getting 1.5 points here, so the computer actually likes them more than Mary Washington, but me as a human voter likes Mary Washington more. So I think this is going to be a close game. I think Mary Washington by a bucket or two, whereas the computer has St. Thomas by a bucket or two. So give me Mary Wash. And our game of the week, Zach, is a fun one down in Puerto Rico, I believe is where this game will be played. Catholic in Chicago. This is a half-point line, so it's basically just a pick 'em, but the computer slightly favors Catholic in this one. But what do you think?
Yeah, like you said, it's another pick 'em. So based on that, I feel like Chicago has entered with some big expectations for this season, without having to worry about any points at play here. Based on that, I'm going to go with Chicago. But I tell you what, this is a big opportunity for Catholic to really show something and show
Yeah.
that they really deserve the top 25 consideration that they have had so far.
Yeah, I think the Puerto Rico games are typically pay-per-view, so we'll have to see if this one's going to be open and available to watch. A little bit disappointing there, but yeah, Zach, I'm going to go the same direction as you, going 5 for 5. Unfortunately, you will not be able to make up any ground on me regardless of the outcomes. But I think let the record show I filled up my bubbles first, so I don't think I just copied you. I'm not scared. I'm not just trying to run out the clock. Too much to be played here. But I think Chicago can win this game. I have them both rated pretty highly on my top 25, but I have Chicago higher, so I might as well pick them here on the neutral court. And that's picks.
So let's wrap up with a mailbag. One mailbag item this week coming from Tim Mao on Twitter, X. Been wondering this, since non-D3 games do not factor into a team's NPI, is the outcome of that non-D3 game truly meaningless? And just for clarification, meaningless as far as the postseason, not meaningless, for
Yeah.
the team or their morale. Matt, I'm gonna put in a plug here for episode 115 of the D3 Datacast. It's we devoted most of the offseason to kind of an NPI summer series, as we called it. And one of those episodes was taking a look at non-Division 3 games in this new NPI era. And so, there's some situations in which maybe those are okay to play or maybe not such a great idea. But regardless of that, yes, they do not factor into NPI in any way. Those games are not factored in. You can win it and it won't help you. You could lose it. It won't hurt you. So it used to be that if you got, way into the weeds of secondary criteria, maybe a game like that would come into play. But even then, as we've heard from previous men's basketball committee chairs, they always like to try to make decisions based on primary criteria only. So how many times did that actually come into play, even as secondary criteria? Probably not really ever.
Yeah.
But yes, officially now in NPI, that has no impact whatsoever.
Yeah, you could play the worst non-Division 3 team possible, and you could lose that game by 100, or you could lose that game by 1, or you could win that game by 1, or you could win that game by 100, and it will not change your tournament prospects whatsoever. So yeah, as far as that, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. It's not just for the Book of Ecclesiastes, it's also for non-Division 3 games as far as NPI is concerned. Could be good for your team. Could be a game that you get everyone in during finals week. Who knows? But yeah, there's the only, okay, technically could a conference have a tiebreaker that considered all games, and maybe that would affect seeding, and then maybe that would help you get, but there's no NPI there, right? There's, from an NCAA perspective, a committee, NPI is never looking at this game and saying it's mattering at all. Yep.
So that wraps up this week's mailbag. If you've got something for us that you'd like for us to address at the end of next week's show, you can leave us a message on this episode on the YouTube page. You can find us on social media at D3 Datacast. You can find us lots of ways, and we'd love to talk about anything that you have for us. Always have some fun with the mailbag, Matt. But we get out of here with a word of thanks for everyone supporting us through the Patreon platform at patreon.com/D3Datacast. A couple of shout outs. Welcome back, Griffin Levine, to the Great Job Team tier supporter, as well as Kev, new this week. Always great to have more people to thank, and continue to thank the people who have been with us, going on, our second season here under the Patreon platform, I believe. And it's been great to see, great to hear so many words of encouragement from so many people. really keeps us doing what we do.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Every week or two, it feels like we get one or two new Patreon supporters. We're so grateful for that. If you'd like to join at either the $3 or $5 a month tier, go to patreon.com/D3 Datacast. It helps us create these episodes, keep the data that we kind of showed this week, keep that data ad-free on the website. Just support what we do. If you love the show, subscribe to this channel, give the episode a thumbs up. That helps a lot too. So Zach, had fun talking conferences with you. We're getting into the thick of it this year with Division III basketball. But let's get this episode posted. And for now, we're going to say, good job, team.